Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins. In the days after the Great War of the Ring, when the shadow of Sauron had at last been swept away like smoke before a mighty wind, Middle-earth lay in a strange hush, as if the world itself were drawing a long breath. Yet Gandalf the White, though his heart was lightened by victory, felt the stirring of a quieter unease. It was said that in the time of Númenor's glory, long before its pride led to ruin, the wise among men had built a fortress at the edge of the world, where even the stars seemed distant and strange. This place was called Carneathra, and it was sealed with enchantments deep and old. For within its halls lay a secret the Númenóreans feared to lose, but dared not wield. Now, with the world reshaped and many ancient wards fading, Gandalf feared that this lost fortress might once more be uncovered, and with it, the secret within. Thus it was that Gandalf mounted his horse Shadowfoot, for Shadowfax had sailed into the west, and rode eastward into lands where the maps grew vague, and old songs spoke of ghostly kings and barren plains under a red, weeping sun. The journey was long and weary. Across the Anduin he rode, and through the dry lands where the grass was brittle and the stones were sharp. There were few living souls there, save for small bands of wanderers who watched him with wary eyes, muttering of the White Rider with fear and wonder. Great ruins loomed in the wastes, broken towers and nameless tombs where the wind keened through hollow halls. At length, after many days, Gandalf came to the borders of a wide desert called Dor Farak, the Forsaken Land. There, rising like the bones of a giant fallen upon the world, were the first outlying stones of Carneathra. The fortress was not built as others were. Its towers were not merely defenses. They were wards woven with forgotten spells. The stones themselves shimmered faintly, as if holding memories of a brighter age. Yet now they were crumbled and blackened, and an icy mist clung to the broken walls, though the sun beat harshly overhead. Gandalf dismounted, standing silent before the threshold. A vast gate, sundered and leaning, gaped before him, and from the darkness beyond came a whispering, as of many voices speaking all at once, some in tongues he knew, others in languages lost to mortal ears. He took up his staff, which glowed faintly at its tip, and passed beneath the fallen arch. Within the fortress was a maze of shadows and shattered stone. Great halls stretched into darkness, and winding stairways led up into broken spires or down into lightless deeps. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and old death. As he ventured deeper, the whispering grew louder, resolving into words that brushed against his mind like cold fingers. "Turn back," they sighed. "Go no further." But Gandalf was not easily turned aside. He pressed on, his staff lighting the way, until he came to a vast chamber whose ceiling had long since fallen away, leaving only the sky, now bruised and purple with evening, to gaze down. In the center of the chamber stood a great door, wrought of black iron and veined with silver runes. Across its surface ran 7 seals, each one a disk of dark stone inscribed with symbols of the elder days. Around the door were carvings of kings crowned with stars and warriors bearing swords wreathed in flame. Gandalf approached, his heart beating a solemn drumbeat in his chest. He reached out a hand to touch the first seal, and at once the air grew colder, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble. From the shadows around the chamber, figures began to emerge, tall and grim, clad in the raiment of Númenórean lords of old. But their faces were pale and empty, and their eyes glowed faintly with a ghostly light. And at her life in the spacious banks, waiting for dispatch and arrival. They were the guardians of the seals, spirits bound by ancient oaths to defend the secret of Carneathra until the end of days. One among them stepped forward, his helm marked with the emblem of a broken crown. He raised a sword that burned with an eerie silver fire and spoke in a voice like the grinding of stones. "Who comes to disturb the slumber of the faithful?" Gandalf planted his staff before him and answered in a voice clear and strong. "I am Gandalf the White, servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. I come seeking that which was hidden to preserve the light of the world." The spectral king studied him for a long moment and then spoke again. "If you would pass, O White Rider, you must prove your worth. Each seal is bound by riddle and trial. Fail, and you shall be cast into shadow, forgotten until the stars fall from the sky." With that, the king stepped back, and the other spirits raised their swords in silent salute. The first trial awaited. Gandalf stood alone before the 7 seals, knowing that the path ahead would be long and perilous, and that the fate of many might yet hang upon his courage and wisdom. The whispering voices fell silent, and in their place a deep, resonant voice spoke from the very stones. "First comes the trial of the mind. Answer true, or remain forever in darkness." The first riddle was about to begin. Before the vast door of iron and silver, Gandalf stood in solemn silence, the cold breath of the unseen weighing heavy upon him. Around the chamber, the spectral guardians hovered like mist-made flesh, their empty eyes fixed upon the wizard as if measuring his very soul. The voice, deep and ancient as the roots of mountains, echoed once more from the stones, and it spoke the riddle of the first seal. "Born of no mother, yet mother of many relationship, I carry the songs of the ancient and the new. I pass unseen, but leave my mark on stone and soul. What am I?" The words stirred the air, and with them came a tremor through the hall, as if the fortress itself waited with bated breath. Gandalf bowed his head, his brow furrowed in thought, for riddles such as these were not mere trifles in forgotten corners of the world, but woven with the very power that held the seals fast. To answer wrongly was not to be scorned, but to be unmade, cast into a darkness from which even he, bearer of the white flame, might not return. He turned the riddle over in his mind, feeling the weight of each word. Born of no mother, it said, and yet it begot many. It carried songs, the songs of both ancient and new. It passed unseen, but left its mark indelible upon stone and soul alike. The answer came to him, not in a flash, but with a slow certainty of dawn banishing the night. Lifting his staff, Gandalf spoke aloud, his voice steady and sonorous. "The answer is the wind." For a moment, all was still. Then the first of the 7 seals, the highest upon the iron door, shivered with a sound like cracking ice and broke apart, falling away into dust that shimmered and was gone. A low murmur of approval, or perhaps warning, passed among the spectral lords. Yet the road was but begun. No sooner had the first seal fallen than the second voice rose, keen and sharp as the cry of a hunting hawk, and the next riddle was given. I am the herald of beginnings and endings, the bane of kings, the fall of towers. Silent I creep, patient I wait, and no man can conquer me. What am I? Again Gandalf stood in thought, though now a deeper chill settled upon him. Around him, the walls of Carneathra seemed to lean closer, and from the broken halls beyond, a sound arose, the dry whisper of many footsteps, though no living being approached. Shadow deepened, and a faint red light, like the afterglow of a dying fire, flickered along the carvings of the old king base of spirits, the herald of beginnings and endings, the bane of kings and fall of towers. There was little subtlety in such words to one who had witnessed the passing of ages. Gandalf's heart grew heavy, for he knew the answer was grim, yet it was truth nonetheless. Time, he said, and the word rang through the hall. The second seal shattered as the first had done, and a groaning noise, deep and sorrowful, came from the door. But with its breaking, a new peril was unleashed. For from the darkness beyond the open halls came shapes like writhing smoke, and they gathered into forms, warriors of shadow and flame, the remnants of those who had once served the darkness against which Carneathra had been raised. Their swords gleamed like starlight through a storm, and though they did not speak, their intent was clear. The king of the spectral guardians stepped forward, his broken-crowned helm gleaming dully in the cold light. "Thus begins the trial of valor," he ended. "To pass onward, you must withstand the assault of the forgotten. Stand or fall into ruin." Gandalf tightened his grip upon his staff. He knew that magic alone would not suffice. These were spirits bound by ancient pacts beyond the mere scattering of light and fire. He must fight with all the strength of his will and heart. The first of the shadow warriors rushed upon him, swift and silent, blade raised high. Gandalf met it with a cry that rang like a trumpet blast, casting out a circle of blinding white light. The shadow reeled back, but more came, a tide of darkness seeking to engulf the single point of light he bore. Again and again they struck, and Gandalf moved among them like a flame whipped by the wind, his staff whirling, casting great arcs of silver fire. Where he struck, the shadows tore and faded, but they were endless, and for each that fell, another rose from the darkness. The battle raged across the ruined hall, and the ancient carvings of Númenórean kings bore witness in silence. Gandalf felt his strength ebbing, for the fight was not merely of body, but of spirit. Each blow struck against him weighed upon his soul, seeking to drag him down into despair and weariness. Yet he remembered then the words spoken in the secret places of Valinor, when first he had been sent into the world, that hope is not kindled by might alone, but by enduring when all seems lost. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, Gandalf raised his staff high and cried aloud words in the high tongue of the West. "Begone by the flame imperishable, by the light that was before time, I banish thee." A wave of brilliance swept outward, dazzling and pure, and the shadow warriors wailed as they dissolved into nothingness, leaving only the soft sighing of the barren wind. The hall was empty once more, save for Gandalf and the spectral guardians, who now watched him with a different gaze, less of judgment and more of grim respect. The king with the broken crown stepped forward, and his voice, though still heavy, held a note of something that might once have been pride. "2 seals undone, and the first trial passed. But the road is long yet, White Rider." steel thy heart, for deeper darkness awaits, and the ancient cunning of those who set these wards is not so easily overcome." Gandalf bowed his head, acknowledging the burden he had willingly taken upon himself. He turned once more to the iron door, now marked with 2 great empty spaces where the seals had been. 5 still remained, and with each would come greater trials. Yet he had come too far to turn back now, and the secret of Carneathra, whatever it might be, lay closer with each step. Thus, with staff in hand and resolve unshaken, Gandalf prepared to face the next riddle and the deeper mysteries that waited beyond. Ow! The hall of Carneathra stood silent once more, save for the low, unending whisper of the wind threading through broken stone and sundered arches. The light of Gandalf's staff burned steady, casting long, wavering shadows upon the ancient walls, where once proud kings and warriors had gazed down in stern majesty, now worn and crumbling as the memory of Númenor itself. Before him the iron door loomed, vast and unyielding, still adorned with 5 unbroken seals, each bearing runes of power, so old that even Gandalf, wise among the wise, could barely discern their meaning. Yet he had not come so far to falter at the sight of grim omens and dark foreboding. Drawing a long breath, he stepped forward, and at once the deep voice that seemed to dwell within the very stones rose again, more solemn than before, as though the fortress itself grieved for the trials it was bound to set. "Bird is the trial of insight. Look beyond the scene and speak what lies hidden." As the voice faded into the heavy air, the hall around him shifted, and Gandalf beheld a vision taking shape, not with the sharpness of waking sight, but as if the world itself had become a half-remembered dream. He stood no longer in the ruined fortress, but in a grand city of white stone and soaring towers, where the banners of Númenor yet flew proud beneath a sky of living gold. The streets bustled with life. Tall men with proud faces and bright eyes walked among gardens where the flowers sang with the voices of unseen spirits. Music echoed from hidden courtyards, and laughter mingled with the scent of the sea, rich and clean. But even as he watched, the vision changed. A shadow blacker than night crept over the shining city. Towers shuddered and fell, banners withered to ash, and the proud men became twisted and fell to their knees before a great figure cloaked in flame and darkness, whose unseen face bore a crown of iron. The sea itself rose in fury, and the city was swept away beneath churning waves. Gandalf stood unmoving, though the sorrow of the vision tore at his heart, for he understood now. He was being shown not merely the past, but the great flaw that had doomed the Númenóreans, the pride that led them to worship false kings and to rebel against the will of the valor. The true trial was not to mourn what was lost, but to discern what was hidden even within greatness, the seed of doom planted by their own hands. Lifting his staff, he spoke into the trembling air. What lies hidden is the pride that blinds the wise, the thirst for dominion over death, and the fear of fading. This alone undid the might of Númenor. The vision broke apart like mist before the sun, and Gandalf stood once more before the iron door, where the third seal cracked and fell away with a soft, mournful sigh. From the shadows, the spectral king inclined his head ever so slightly, as if acknowledging the truth spoken aloud. But no respite was granted him, for immediately the fourth trial began. A low rumbling shook the earth, and the chamber around him seemed to sink deeper into shadow. From fissures in the ground rose a heavy mist, dark and clinging, and the voice of the stone spoke again, now deeper, as if coming from the roots of the world. Fourth is the trial of endurance. Stand firm against the false and the perilous, lest your soul be broken. But before Gandalf's eyes, shapes began to form within the mist. Forms fair and terrible to behold. Figures of great beauty, clad in robes of shimmering light, approached him, and their faces were radiant and kind. They spoke words of comfort and power, promising rest from toil, wisdom beyond measure, and even the lifting of the burden of mortality itself. Their voices, though sweet, held a sharpness beneath the surface, like a blade hidden within silken folds. "Abandon this path, O traveler of the West," they said. "Leave behind the bitter labors and come into peace. Here shall you find all that you have lost, and more besides. No more grief, no more struggle, only joy." For a moment, the weight of his long years, his many sorrows, and the memories of loss pressed upon Gandalf like a mountain. He thought of the friends he had buried, of the battles fought with blood and fire, of the ceaseless weariness that clung to him like a second skin. How easy it would be, how tempting to lay down his burdens and accept the false peace these phantoms offered. Yet in the depth of his heart, Gandalf knew their promises for what they were. Lies woven of longing and despair, meant to ensnare the will and lead it into bondage. He gripped his staff tighter, and though the mists thickened and the visions grew ever more alluring, he planted his feet firmly upon the broken stones and spoke aloud, though the effort cost him dearly. "I will not be turned. For though the road be dark and sorrowful, it is better to walk in truth than to lie dreaming in falsehood. Begone, ye fans of deceit." The figures shrieked as if in rage, and the mist recoiled, drawing away into the fissures from whence it had come. The fourth seal, tested by his endurance, cracked and fell, leaving only 3 between him and the hidden heart of Carneathra. Yet Gandalf staggered now, his strength sorely tried. He leaned heavily upon his staff, and his breath came hard. But he knew there would be no mercy given, for the ancient builders of this place had crafted their trials not merely to test strength or wit, but the very soul itself. The spectral king regarded him gravely and spoke once more. "4 seals undone, 4 trials past. Few there are among the living who could come so far. Yet the greatest perils lie ahead, for the fortress was built to guard more than mere gold or iron. It shields a truth that was hidden even from the eyes of the wise." And so Gandalf steeled himself, lifting his weary heart as a banner against the gathering gloom, and prepared to face the 5th trial, whatever horror or cunning it might bring. The air within the ruined hall grew colder still, and a shadow unseen passed over the dim light of Gandalf's staff, so that even the glow of his power seemed but a faint ember against the gathering gloom. The silence that fell was heavy and profound, as though the very stones of Carneathra waited with bated breath for the next ordeal. The spectral guardians, silent sentinels of ancient oaths, withdrew into the misted recesses of the chamber, leaving Gandalf alone before the iron door, now marred by the breaking of 4 seals, yet still formidable in its grim majesty. Above him, the ceiling had long since crumbled away, and through the yawning breach, the darkened sky of the forsaken east stared down, bare-reft of stars. Then the deep voice of the fortress, that somber will bound into stone and iron, spoke again, and the words it uttered seemed to fall like lead upon the heart. "5th is the trial of memory. Recall what has been forgotten, or perish in oblivion." At these words, the world about Gandalf shifted once more, and he felt himself drawn into a place beyond sight and time, where the air was thick with the dust of ages. Before him rose a stairway hewn of black marble, vast and winding, ascending into a darkness so profound that not even the light of his staff could pierce it. Upon each step, names were engraved, countless and fading, the names of men long dead, of deeds long passed into legend, and of cities whose towers had fallen into the sea. As he climbed, a voice, terrible and sweet, whispered at his ear, urging him to forget, to let the burden of memory slip away, to surrender to the bliss of unknowing. The climb was wear beyond all reckoning, for every step demanded that Gandalf recall something once learned, some piece of ancient wisdom, some memory of the elder days that even the wise scarce spoke of. If he faltered, if he forgot, the stair would crumble beneath him, and he would fall forever into the abyss of oblivion. Sweat beaded upon his brow, though the air was chill, and with each step the weariness of countless years pressed heavier upon him. He remembered the great ships of Númenórean sailing westward in defiance, the sorrow of Elendil upon the broken shore, the white tree blooming in the courts of Minas Ithil before its fall into shadow. And he remembered battles fought beneath blackened skies, the cries of the faithful, and the song of the valor beyond the circles of the world. Step by step he climbed, each memory a light against the encroaching dark, each recollection a shield against the voice that sought to undo him. At last, after what seemed an age, Gandalf reached the summit, and there, upon a great stone plinth, lay a single artifact, a circlet wrought of mithil and pearl, the crown of a king who had perished, nameless and alone, his line forgotten, his deeds unsung. He knew at once that he must name the crown, and by doing so prove that memory had not been extinguished. Pressing his hand to his heart, Gandalf spoke. "This is the crown of Ellen Termo, last Warden of the East, who stood when all others fled and kept the fires of the West burning in secret until the end." At utterance of the name, the stairway and the dark space about it dissolved into mist, and Gandalf found himself once more standing before the iron door, where the fifth seal shattered with a sharp, ringing crack and fell away. Yet the effort had drained him sorely, for the burden of memory is no light thing, and to recall the weight of ages past is to bear the sorrow of all that has been. The spectral king with the broken crown stepped forth from the shadows and spoke again, his voice heavy with both sorrow and stern pride. 5 seals undone, White Rider, 5 trials. Fewer still among elves or men could have endured so much. Yet the 6th trial awaits, and it shall not be of mind or spirit alone, but of blood in bone. And even as he spoke, the ground trembled, and from the far side of the hall a great rumbling arose, as if the earth itself were being torn asunder. A rift opened in the stone, and from it emerged a creature of terror, unlike any Gandalf had faced since the deep places of Moria. It was not a Balrog, for no flame clung to its form, but a thing of twisted stone and iron, shaped by forgotten sorceries into the likeness of a mighty beast. A guardian wrought in the last days of Númenor's pride, when even the wise had grown desperate enough to forge monstrosities to guard their secrets. The creature's eyes burned with a dull red light, and in its many jointed hands it bore weapons of jagged steel. Its form was vast and ponderous, yet with a terrible swiftness it moved, its every step sending tremors through the ruin. It roared, a sound like the grinding of mountains, and the iron door behind Gandalf shook upon its hinges. The trial of strength had begun. Gandalf did not flee, nor did he falter. Though his strength was sorely tried, and though no mortal weapon could have prevailed against such a foe, he stood his ground, lifting his staff in one hand and drawing Glamandering his sword with the other. For though he was a being of spirit, bound in flesh, he had fought the demons of the ancient world and stood against the darkness before the coming of men. The creature charged, and Gandalf met it with a cry of battle that rang like a bell of silver through the desolation. His staff shone with a fierce white light, and Glending blazed with cold fire. He leapt aside from the first great blow of the beast's iron mace, the impact shattering the stones where he had stood but a heartbeat before, and with a swift riposte, he drove his sword into a seam between the plates of its stony hide. The beast roared in fury and pain, but it did not fall. Again and again they clashed. Light against shadow, spirit against sorcery, and the very walls of Carneathra shook with the fury of their contest. Gandalf's strength waned, for the foe was relentless and tireless, but in the deep places of his heart he found the strength of purpose that no darkness could overcome. At last, seeing that no force of arms alone would suffice, Gandalf called upon the hidden fire that dwelt within him, the secret flame that was his by right of his being, and he struck the beast, not with sword or staff, but with the very light of his spirit unleashed in a blinding torrent. The creature shrieked, a sound so dreadful that the spectral guardians recoiled, and its form cracked and splintered, great fissures racing across its hide. With a final roar, it fell to pieces, and the hall was silent once more. Breathing hard, Gandalf straightened, and before him, as if in answer to his triumph, the sixth seal upon the iron door cracked and crumbled away. Only one remained. The ruin of the stone beast lay scattered across the shattered floor, its great limbs and broken weapons already crumbling into dust, as the ancient sorceries that had bound it were undone. The silence that followed was deep and profound, as if the very breath of the fortress itself had been stolen away by the final death cry of its monstrous guardian. Gandalf stood amidst the wreckage, weary beyond any telling, yet on his white robes, though stained with ash and shadow, still shone faintly in the gloom, and his staff, though nicked and blackened, yet burned with a steady light. The fire of his spirit undiminished by the trials endured. Before him now loomed the iron door, dark and massive, bearing upon its surface only the final seal, the last barrier between him and the secret that Carneathra had guarded through the ruin of kingdoms and the passing of ages. The spectral king, helm cracked and mantle torn, approached with a slow and solemn tread, and his voice, when he spoke, was grave as the tolling of a great bell at the passing of an age. "Dick's trials have you passed, O wanderer from the west. The seventh and last awaits, and it is unlike all others. For it is not of mind, nor spirit, nor strength, but of choice. Choose rightly, and the way shall be opened. Choose falsely, and all that you are shall be forfeit to the darkness that dwells beyond these stones." At these words the chamber itself seemed to grow dimmer, and a mist like smoke, dark and heavy, rose from the broken earth. Shapes stirred within it, vague and terrible. Yet Gandalf did not flinch. For he perceived that this was no mere conjuring, but the gathering of the ancient dread that had ever haunted the hearts of men. The fear of choice, the terror of consequence, the sorrow of inevitable loss. The final trial was set. From the mist, two paths revealed themselves, stretching forward beyond the threshold of the iron door, each winding into the unseen depths of Carneathra. The first path was bathed in a golden light, warm and fair, and upon it were strewn the banners of the west, bright and proud, and the sound of laughter and song could be heard faintly upon the air. The second path was shadowed and grim, its stones cracked and blood-stained, and a chill wind blew from its unseen end, carrying with it the distant cry of the lost. The voice of the fortress spoke once more, and its words were heavy with sorrow. Math path leads to power swift and sure, the other to sacrifice and doubt. One shall give you mastery over the secret you seek, the other shall guard it still, at a cost known only to yourself. Choose and be judged. Gandalf stood long in silence, his heart troubled, for the golden path called to him with the sweet allure of triumph, the promise that the secret of Carneathra, whatever it might be, could be wielded to heal the wounds of the world, to bring swift and certain peace to a land long wearied by war. Yet in the depths of his soul he knew that such mastery, however well-intentioned, could not be trusted even to the wise. For power calls to power, and even the hand that would use it only for good must tremble lest it be tempted in pride. The darker path offered no such certainty, only the grim assurance of duty fulfilled at personal cost. The silent keeping of a trust meant not to be claimed, but to be preserved. Thus it was that Gandalf turned from the bright and easy way, setting his feet instead upon the shadowed road. At once the golden path withered and faded, and a great sigh, as of 1,000 spirits relieved of an ancient burden, echoed through the hall. The final seal upon the iron door cracked with a sound like the breaking of the world, and it fell away in shards that vanished like smoke upon the wind. The door swung open with a slow and ponderous groan, revealing a stair descending into darkness deeper than night. Without hesitation, Gandalf entered, and the heavy portal closed silently behind him, sealing away the world of light. He descended for a long time, deeper than the roots of any mountain, until at last he came to a small chamber carved of the same black stone as the stair, but set with veins of silver that glimmered faintly in the gloom. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal of smooth marble, and upon it rested not a weapon, nor a crown, nor a jewel of power, but a simple scroll bound in a ribbon of faded blue. Gandalf approached, and as he did, the light of his staff grew softer, less fierce, as though bowing in reverence. He reached out with gentle hands and lifted the scroll, and as he did so, a warmth spread through the cold air, a presence both mighty and gentle, as if the very spirit of the West had awoken to witness the moment. Unbinding the ribbon, Gandalf unrolled the scroll and read the words written there in the fair hand of the Númenóreans of old. Being we, the faithful, do swear by the light of the West and the flame imperishable, that never shall we bow to darkness, nor forsake the mercy of the valor. In hope unyielding we stand, in sorrow steadfast, though towers fall and kingdoms perish. Let this be our oath until the end of days. And Gandalf understood then the true nature of the secret guarded in Carneathra. Not a weapon of war, not a means of dominion, but a memory of hope, a promise of faith unbroken through all despair. In a world scarred by shadow and betrayal, such a light was more precious than any sword or crown. He bowed his head, tears pricking the corners of his eyes, and he placed the scroll within his cloak. Turning, he retraced his steps, and the shadows parted before him, and the iron door opened once more to the starlit ruin of Carneathra. The spectral guardian stood arrayed before him, and the king with the broken crown saluted with his sword, a gesture of honor and farewell. "Go, bearer of the oath," he said, "and let its light shine again among the free peoples. Long have we waited, and now our watch is ended." With that, the spirits faded, their long vigil fulfilled, leaving only the silence of the ancient stones. Gandalf mounted Shadowfoot once more and rode westward, bearing with him not a weapon to conquer, but a memory to inspire, a beacon for the days yet to come. When again the darkness would gather, and the hearts of men would tremble. And far behind him, in the lost fortress of Carneathra, the iron door swung shut for the last time, and the whisper of ancient oaths rose like the song of a forgotten sea. The stars wheeled overhead in slow, ancient dances as Gandalf rode westward, the dark and broken lands of the east falling behind him like a troubled dream. The night was cold, and the wind carried with it the sharp scent of stone and ruin. Yet within Gandalf's heart there burned a quiet flame, steadfast and untroubled, for he bore now a treasure greater than any hoarded gold or hidden weapon, the living memory of the faithful, preserved across the long, bitter years. The scroll lay close to his breast, light in weight but heavy in meaning, a beacon wrought not of fire or iron, but of unyielding hope, a remembrance of the spirit that no shadow could conquer. Thus he rode across the wide and empty plains where once proud cities had stood, and mighty hosts had marched beneath banners of silver and sable. Now only the broken bones of towers jutted from the earth, and the lonely howl of the wolf was king, where once the trumpets of Númenórean had sounded. Yet even amidst this desolation, Gandalf rode with a purpose as steady as the path of the stars, for he knew that the work was not yet finished. To bear a light was not enough. It must be set high where all could see it, lest the world fall again into forgetfulness. As he passed into the lands west of Dorak, he encountered few living beings, for these places had long been feared by men and beasts alike. The few who dwelt there were a grim and silent folk, wary of strangers and slow to trust. Yet when they beheld Gandalf, shining white against the darkness, like a shard of the lost moon, they bowed low and whispered blessings, though they knew not his name nor his purpose. For in that land where shadows clung to the very earth, even the simplest heart could feel the breath of the west when it came. At length, after many weary days, Gandalf came to the wide river Caran, whose waters, though fouled by the ashes of distant wars, still flowed bright beneath the cold light of the stars. There he found an ancient ferry half sunken into the mire, and by strength of will and craft he repaired it enough to bear him across. The river groaned and protested beneath the weight of horse and rider, but at last Gandalf set foot upon the western shore and knew that he had crossed a threshold not merely of land, but of destiny. In the days that followed, the land grew gentler, and signs of life returned. Green things crept among the ruins, and birds sang thin and hesitant songs in the broken branches. Yet Gandalf did not tarry, for he was drawn onward by a certainty that was deeper than thought, as if some great tide of fate moved with him. He passed through forgotten valleys and over wind-swept hills until at last he came to a place where the land rose into a great ridge crowned with a circle of ancient stone. There he paused, for the stones were of no mortal making, but had been set in the elder days by hands that knew the true speech of the earth and the stars. They were worn and weathered by time, their surfaces like encrusted and cracked, but the power that dwelt within them had not faded entirely. Gandalf dismounted and approached the circle with reverence, knowing that here perhaps he could call forth what must be called. Standing within the circle, he raised his staff high, and he cried aloud in the high speech of the West, a summons that few now living could have understood. O spirits of the faithful, O guardians of the ancient hope, hear me. I bear the token of your oath, and I seek counsel in the darkness that gathers once more. Come forth, if you will, or send a sign that I may know the path that must be taken. For a long moment there was no sound but the whisper of the wind among the stones. Then, slowly, the air grew heavy, and the stars above him seemed to blur and dim. A soft silver mist rose from the ground, and within it shapes began to form, tall and noble figures, their faces hidden by mantles of shadow, yet radiant with a light that came not from the world of men. The foremost of these figures spoke, and its voice was clear and sorrowful, as the singing of a river in winter. Pale, bearer of the oath, long have we waited for this hour. What would you ask of the faithful who linger yet beyond the circles of the world? Gandalf bowed low, and he held forth the scroll so that its faded ribbon and ancient script could be seen. I seek only to know how best to renew the light in the hearts of men, that the darkness rising in the east may be withstood, not by arms alone, but by the remembrance of who they were and who they might yet be. The spirit was silent for a time, as if pondering words that could not easily be spoken. Then it answered, The light you bear must be sown as a seed is sown, not in might, but in hope, not in triumph, but in quiet faith. Seek the leaders of men, those whose hearts are not yet hardened by pride or fear, and entrust to them the memory of the faithful. Let the words be spoken anew in the halls of kings and in the gatherings of the free. Thus shall the shadow find no easy ground, for hearts strengthened by hope are the shest bulwark against despair. With that, the mist began to fade, and the figures dissolved into the night like breath upon a mirror. Gandalf stood alone once more, but he felt no sorrow, for the burden he bore had grown lighter with the sharing of counsel. Mounting Shadowfoot again, he turned his face westward towards the lands where the kingdoms of men still held sway. Gondor, proud and bright, yet weary. Rohan, steadfast and strong. And the scattered free peoples who clung to their lands with grim resolve. To these he would go, and he would bear the oath not as a weapon, but as a gift, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, hope is not in vain. Thus he rode on, tireless and unwavering, and the night gathered about him like a cloak. But within his heart there burned a light that no darkness could quench. A flame passed down from the elder days, reborn in the heart of the White Rider. And far behind him, in the silent stones of Carneathra, the memory of the faithful endured, whispering still to those who dared to listen, a song of sorrow and of hope that would not be forgotten while the world endured. Through many days and nights Gandalf rode, swift as a storm-driven cloud, crossing the broad leagues of Middle-earth with a tireless urgency, born not of fear, but of duty. The lands through which he passed grew fairer the farther he went westward, for the shadow that clung to the east lay thinner here, though not yet wholly vanquished. Fields of golden grasses rippled beneath the autumn wind, and the forests, though touched with the chill breath of approaching winter, yet sang with the voices of unseen birds, and in the glades the last flowers of the year bowed their bright heads as he passed. Yet for all the beauty that the land still held, Gandalf saw also the scars of war and long fear. Villages fallen silent, farms left untended, and the watchfires burning upon distant hills, their red eyes gleaming wearily against the encroaching night. First among the kingdoms he sought was Rohan, land of the horse lords, whose green fields and wide skies had ever been dear to his heart. He passed through the gap of Rohan unchallenged, for though the guards of the mark were ever vigilant, few would question the passage of one who came cloaked in white and bearing the air of one both perilous and revered. The golden hall of Medusel rose before him atop the heights of Edoas, its thatched roof gleaming even beneath the pale sun, and the banners of the house of Eorel stirred in the cold wind. There, at the door of Medusel, he was met by Éomer, king, strong and stern, his bright hair stirred by the breeze, and his hand resting lightly upon the hilt of his sword. Yet when he beheld Gandalf, his face lightened, and he stepped forward with gladness, for he had known the White Rider in days of peril, and no small measure of his kingdom's hope had been kindled by that friendship. "Welcome, Gandalf," said Éomer, his voice ringing clear above the murmuring wind. "Long has it been since you rode among us, and your coming is as the first star in a darkening sky. What tidings do you bring?" And Gandalf, bowing with a grave smile, answered, "I bring neither war nor warning, but remembrance, a memory of the elder days, a gift of hope born from the ruins of the East, where once the shadow sought to root itself anew." Thus he was brought into the golden hall, where the great pillars carved with the likenesses of horses running free soared up into the gloom of the roof beams, and the fire upon the hearth crackled warmly, casting long shadows. There, in the presence of Éomer and his things, Gandalf spoke of his journey beyond the bounds of known lands, of the lost fortress of Carneathra, and of the trials he had endured to retrieve the ancient oath of the faithful. He did not speak lightly, nor did he embellish his tale with needless flourish, for the truth of the matter carried its own weight, and those who heard him sat silent and still, as though a great and distant music sounded faintly in their hearts. When at last he unrolled the scroll and read aloud the words inscribed thereon, a hush fell over the hall, and even the fire upon the hearth seemed to burn more gently, as if in reverence the words of the oath, though born in another age, in another land, stirred the hearts of the Rohi, as if they had been written but yesterday. For the spirit that spoke through them was one that transcended time and kingdom, the spirit of steadfastness, of loyalty to the light, of hope unbroken even in the face of utter ruin. Arose to his feet, and his hand, though it bore no crown, moved to his heart in solemn salute. "Long have we ridden in the shadow of fear," he said, his voice steady and strong, "and many have been the losses we have suffered. Yet hearing these words, my heart is stirred anew, and I remember that even in defeat there can be honor, and even in sorrow, joy. We shall not forget this gift, Gandalf, nor the road you traveled to bring it to us." Thus was the first seed sown, and Gandalf, though he tried for a few days to speak further with the king and his counselors, soon made ready to ride once more. for he knew that the oath must be borne to other lands as well, lest its light shine too narrowly and its power be lessened. Éomer offered him horses and riders to guard his way, but Gandalf refused with a gentle smile, saying, "The road I ride is guarded by greater powers than spears or swords, and the light I carry is shield enough against the lesser shadows." So it was that he rode from Edoras alone, and the people of Rohan, watching him go, felt a strange stirring in their hearts, as if a wind from a far green shore had passed among them, breathing life into the dying embers of ancient dreams. From Rohan, Gandalf turned southward, crossing the fields of Carneathra, once the northern reach of Gondor, now open and wild. His path led him to the white city of Minas Tirith, still proud upon its 7 circles of stone, though the wounds of the Great War could yet be seen upon its walls and towers. The banner of the King of Gondor, silver upon black, flew from the pinnacle of the Tower of Echelon, and the streets, though once hollow and empty, now bustled with life. As men returned to their homes, and the works of peace began anew. At the gates he was greeted with wonder and joy, for the people remembered well the great pilgrim who'd aided them in their darkest hour. And now they beheld him in the full glory of the White Rider. Word of his coming ran swift through the city, and he was brought before King Elessar himself, who sat upon the high throne, his crown a simple band of silver and mithril, his raiment plain, saved for the green jewel that shone at his breast. Elessar rose and embraced Gandalf as a brother long absent, and when they had spoken for a time of matters both grave and glad, Gandalf once more unfurled the scroll and read aloud the oath of the faithful. In the high hall of stone and light, the words echoed like a trumpet call, and those who heard them felt as though the very foundations of the city were. Aller bowed his head, and when he spoke, his voice was deep and filled with the weight of many ages. "This is a gift beyond measure, Mithrender dear," he said, "for it binds us anew to the ancient light of the West, and reminds us that our strength lies not in pride, but in remembrance, in loyalty, and in hope. Gondor shall keep this oath, and in days to come it shall be sung even in the farthest reaches of the reunited kingdom." Thus was the memory of the faithful sown also in Gondor, and Gandalf knew that his labor had not been in vain. Yet even so he felt that his journey was not yet ended, for there remained still others to whom the light must be borne, those who lived beyond the great rivers and the white mountains, and even into the forgotten corners of the world where the free peoples yet endured in scattered strength. And so once more the White Rider set forth, and the road stretched long before him under the wheeling stars, beyond the shining towers of Menast and the fields of the Pelennor, beyond the silver ribbon of Anduin, winding its stately course through the wide lands of Gondor. Gandalf rode northward, for though the great cities had heard the oath and accepted its charge, he knew that the strength of the West did not lie only in kings in high halls, but also in the hidden places, in the quiet villages, and the wandering folk who tilled the fields and watched the stars with ancient. It was among these that the true memory of Middle-earth, if it was to endure beyond the lifetime of the great and mighty. Thus he journeyed through Anoran and along the green slopes of Aen Arnon, where the houses of the stewards once stood, now restored and filled with the laughter of children and the songs of harvesters. The people greeted him gladly, though they knew him only as a figure from half-remembered tales, and they gathered at the crossroads and in the market squares to hear the words he brought. Beneath the open sky, he spoke of the oath of the faithful, of the hope that had survived the drowning of ancient lands and the long shadow of tyranny. And he taught them songs, old songs reborn with new meaning, that they might carry the memory not as a burden, but as a joy. The road led ever onward, and as autumn deepened, the leaves of the forests turned to fire and gold, and the breath of winter stirred faintly upon the morning air. Gandalf crossed the green lands of Lebanon and came to the wide fords of the Irui, where he turned aside into the hill country, for he desired to visit Lamadon and the rugged folk who had held against the Corsairs in the days of war. They welcomed him with weary hospitality, for theirs was a proud and independent spirit. But when he spoke to them in the ancient tongue, naming the deeds of their fathers and the old friendship that bound them still to the house of Elendil, their hearts were stirred, and they received the oath gladly, setting it among their own ancient customs, like a jewel reforged through valleys and across wind-swept moors. He traveled until at last he stood upon the borders of the White Mountains, where the peaks rose sharp and forbidding against the darkening sky. There he lingered for a time, for the memory of Dimhold and the paths of the dead weighed upon him, and he deemed it fitting to call upon the spirits who had once forsaken their oath, but had redeemed it at the last. In the shadow of the mountains he lit a fire and spoke words of remembrance, commending the dead to the mercy of the West. And in the cold hush that followed, he thought he heard faintly the echo of many voices, as of a host passing into peace. Having done what he could in those lands, Gandalf turned his steps toward the north, across the fields of Enedwyth, where the ruins of forgotten kingdoms lay hidden beneath grass and heather. Here the road was long and lonely, and many nights he slept beneath the open sky, with only the stars for company. Yet he did not despair, for he found solace in the simple beauty of the land, in the wild flowers that clung to the rocky hills, in the clear streams that laughed over their stony beds, and in the cry of the hawk wheeling high above the moor. At length he came to the lands of Ariador, where once the proud realm of Arnor had stood. Now a place of scattered villages and ancient ruins, of lone towers crumbling beneath ivy, and silent barrows where the kings of old slept undisturbed. Here, too, he spoke to those who would listen, to the rangers who still kept the secret watch over the land, to the farmers and herdsmen who tilled the forgotten soil, and to the few who remembered the name of Elendil and the line of self. Though their numbers were few, their hearts were steadfast. And Gandalf rejoiced to see that the spirit of the West had not wholly perished, even in these remote and rugged lands. Among these folk he found many eager to hear the songs and tales he brought, and in the evenings by the hearths of simple homes the words of the oaths were spoken anew, and children learned them as their first lesson, and old men wept to hear them, remembering dimly the glories of the past. Thus the seed he had carried from the ruins of Carneathra began to take root, not with the clamor of armies or the thunder of banners, but in the quiet strength of those who chose to remember and to hope. One evening, as the pale autumn sun sank behind the western hills and the sky was awash with the crimson and gold of departing day, Gandalf sat upon a low hill overlooking the green expanse of the lands once called Cardolan. There he gazed out upon the wide empty fields, and he thought of the countless generations that had risen and fallen, of the cities built and lost, of the battles fought and the songs sung and forgotten. And he felt a deep and abiding sorrow for the transience of all things in Middle-earth. Yet even as he pondered the passing of the ages, a great peace stole over him, for he saw that though towers fall and kings perish, the spirit of hope endures, carried not in stone or sword, but in the hearts of the free. It was for this that the faithful had endured the drowning of Númenórean, for this that the guardians of Carneathra had kept their long watch, and for this that he had braved the trials of the 7 seals. As the stars kindled above him, Gandalf sang softly to himself, a song of the west and of the enduring light. And his voice, though old, was clear and strong, and it rose into the night like a beacon against the coming dark. And far away, beyond the veils of mist and shadow, it seemed to him that he heard an answering song, faint and fair, as if the very land itself were singing in gladness. Thus the White Rider, bearer of the ancient memory, remained for a time among the scattered folk of Eriador, sowing seeds of hope and remembrance, and preparing the hearts of men for days yet to come, when the shadow would rise once more, and the world would be sorely tested. But Gandalf knew that his task was not yet ended. For beyond the wild lands of the north lay other realms, and other hearts yet untouched by the memory he bore. And to these too the light must be carried, lest it be lost forever. Winter crept slowly upon the land as Gandalf pressed onward, and the air grew keen and sharp, filled with a sense of woodsome smoke and froth. The leaves had all fallen from the trees of Eriador, and the fields lay barren under the pale sun, waiting for the touch of snow. Yet the White Rider did not falter, nor did the fire within his heart lessen, for he knew that the memory he bore must be planted deep in the soil of winter earth before the long sleep of winter came. His road turned westward toward the sea, for there were yet scattered settlements along the coasts, remnants of the great days when the Númenórean ships had sailed proudly upon the waters. And he deemed it meet that the oath of the faithful should be spoken there as well, where once the sight of Tolkien was almost glimpsed upon clear days. Thus he came into the lands of Minhir, where the river Baranduin ran broad and strong, and beyond it the woods of the Shire lay in quiet peace, untouched by the cares of kings and wars. Gandalf smiled to himself as he thought of that green and gentle land, for he loved the hobbits dearly, and though they played no part in the great councils of the world, yet their resilience and simple joy were a strength beyond reckoning. But he turned aside from the Shire, for his path led further west to the coastlands, where few now dwelt, and where the ruins of great havens lay silent beneath the sighing of the sea. At the mouth of the river Lune, where once the ships of Gil-galad had sailed to war and to the Blessed Realm, there still stood the Grey Havens, though their people were few and their days of glory long past. There Gandalf was welcomed with wonder and reverence, for the elves who remained knew him for what he was, though he wore a mortal form. And Círdan the shipwright, ancient beyond all reckoning of men, received him upon the white quays. Together they walked beneath the tall towers that gazed out upon the sea, and Gandalf spoke of his journey, of the hidden fortress of Carneathra, and of the oath he had reclaimed from the darkness of the east. Círdan listened in silence, his face grave and thoughtful, and when Gandalf had finished, he spoke but few words, yet they were heavy with meaning. "Long have we watched, and long have we waited," said Círdan, his voice like the deep music of the sea. "And though our time in Middle East wanes, we rejoice to see the memory of the faithful rekindled. For it is not for us to conquer shadow, but for the hearts of men to endure and to prevail. Go forth, Mithrand, and plant well the seeds of hope, for the days to come shall be darker than any yet seen." And Gandalf bowed in gratitude, knowing that in those ancient eyes there shone a foresight far keener than any granted to mortal kind. He tried but a little while in the havens, breathing the sweet salt air and gazing westward across the wide sea, where beyond sight lay the undying lands. Yet he turned away from that call, for his task was yet unfinished, and while Middle-ear endured, his duty held him still. Departing from the Grey Havens, he journeyed south along the rugged coast, where the cliffs rose sheer from the sea, and the gulls wheeled in the cold air, crying their lonely songs. The land here was wild and little inhabited, but in hidden coves and sheltered valleys he found fisherfolk and wanderers, hardy souls who lived by the bounty of the waters and the whisper of the tow. These two Gandalf spoke, though in simpler words, teaching them the old songs and the memory of the oath, that even in the humblest hearts the light might find a place to kindle. Thus the days passed, and the year wore on, and winter came down in earnest, cloaking the world in white and binding rivers and fields beneath its icy hand. Gandalf made his way inland once more, for he had heard tidings of gatherings among the Dunedain, the Rangers of the North, who still kept secret vigil over the wide and empty lands that once had been Arnor. In the shelter of ancient forests, under the towering trees, where the snow fell softly among the bare branches, he found them tall men clad in gray and green, whose eyes were keen and whose hearts were steadfast. Among them were some who had fought beside Aragorn in the war against Sauron, and they welcomed Gandalf with the deep respect accorded to one who had walked among the wise since the elder days. There, by the light of campfires that burned bright against the encircling dark, Gandalf shared the story of Carneathra and the Seven Seals. He spoke to them of the trials he had faced, of the riddle and the battle, the endurance and the choice, and of the scroll that bore the unbroken memory of the faithful. The Rangers listened intently, and when he had finished, they pledged themselves anew to the guardianship of the West, swearing by their forefathers who had crossed the sea in the ships of Elendil. Those nights among the Rangers, Gandalf saw the fulfillment of a hope he had scarcely dared to name, that the strength of the West did not lie only in the great cities or in the shining courts of kings, but in the hearts of those who lived unseen and unsung, who kept the old faith without promise of reward, who fought not for glory, but because it was right. Thus heartened, Gandalf prepared at last to return to the lands nearer the heart of the world, where the fate of many would soon be woven together once more. Yet he knew that the seeds he had sown, scattered across the breadth of Middle-earth, would grow in secret, watered by hope, and guarded by the memory he had carried from the shadowed halls of Carneathra. And as he rode southward again through the vast silent winterlands, where the snow lay deep and the trees whispered among themselves in the language of dream, he sang softly to himself the song of the faithful, and the light of the West rode with him, unseen yet ever present, a flame against the long night that was yet to come. The deep heart of winter lay heavy upon Middle-earth as Gandalf returned southward, and the road was hard and slow, for the snowdrifts rose high across the old path, and the rivers, though bound by ice, yet hid treacherous waters beneath their frozen skins. Yet neither hardship nor weariness turned him aside, for the fire that burned within him was of a greater light than that of any hearth, and it drove him onward, a silent beacon in the sleeping world. He crossed once more the wild lands of Minnarth, and came again to the borders of the Shire. And though he longed for a moment to tarry among the hobbits, to share in their simple joys, and sit once more by a warm hearth with pipeweed and ale, he knew that his task called him beyond, to the gathering places of the wise and the great. Thus he turned eastward, taking the ancient road that wound toward Bree, where still the old inn of the Prancing Pony stood, and from there onward toward Rivendell, that hidden vale of peace where Eland had ruled in ages past. Though Eland himself had departed into the west, Rivendell remained, a haven of lore and memory, and Gandalf knew that there, if anywhere in Middle-earth, the seed of hope he bore might find rich soil to flourish. The journey was slow, for the snows lay deep upon the weather hills, and the cold winds blew keenly from the north. But at last, after many days, he came to the hidden paths that led into the valley. The air grew softer as he descended, and though the trees stood bare and silent, a sense of watchfulness and quiet strength filled the air, as if the land itself remembered the days of old and held vigil against the passing dark. Lights gleamed among the trees, and the sound of water flowing over stones reached his ears like a song remembered from childhood. Gandalf smiled, for the sight of Rivendell, even in winter's shroud, warmed his heart as few things could. At the great house of Elrond, now tended by his sons Eladon and Elrare, Gandalf was welcomed as one returning from a long and perilous road. They greeted him with gladness, though their faces, like the face of Rivendell itself, bore the deepening lines of sorrow and endurance. For they too knew that the world was changing, and that the fair things of the elder days were fading like mist before the rising sun. In the high hall, where once the Council of Eland had been held, Gandalf spoke again the tale of Carneathra, of the 7 seals, of the trials he had faced, and the scroll he had retrieved. Elessar and Elrohar listened gravely, and when he read aloud the oath of the faithful, their eyes shone with a light both proud and sorrowful. For they remembered well the Númenóreans who had been their friends in ages long past, and the fall of that great people weighed heavily upon them still. "You have done a great thing, Mithrandir," said Elodan when the tale was ended. "For though many now look to the rebuilding of kingdoms and the healing of lands, it is in the hearts of men that the true battle lies. And without remembrance, they are as ships adrift, without stars to guide them." "We shall keep this memory here," said Elrare, "and we shall teach it to those who come after, that even as the years grow long and the days grow dim, the light of the West shall not be wholly lost from the world." Thus Gandalf found a home for the oaths among the elves who yet remained in Middle-earth, and he rejoiced, though his heart was touched with sadness, knowing that their time was drawing to an end, and that soon the last ships would sail, and the shores of the West would call to them. Having fulfilled his purpose in Rivendell, he lingered but a little while longer, taking counsel with the wise, gathering tidings of the lands beyond, and preparing for the last steps of his journey. For though he had carried the memory of the faithful far across Middle-earth, he knew that the final test lay not in the telling of tales, nor in the planting of seeds, but in the steadfastness of those who heard, in the choices they would make when once again the shadows stirred. In the choices they would make when once again the shadow stirred. Thus he departed Rivendell with a quiet heart, riding once more into the wide lands that stretched between the mountains and the sea. He traveled through lands both wild and tamed, speaking to those he met, reminding them of the strength that lay not in sword or crown, but in the will to endure, the courage to hope, and the wisdom to remember. His words were like sparks scattered upon the wind, unseen and unfelt by some, but catching fire in the hearts of others, kindling a light that no darkness could easily extinguish. So passed the months, and winter deepened into its final bitter hold upon the world. Yet in the hearts of many, a quiet stirring had begun. A remembrance of forgotten oaths, a rekindling of old loyalties, a soft yet growing strength that whispered that even should darkness fall again, it would not find the world unguarded or unready. As the snows began at last to lessen, and the first faint breath of spring stirred upon the southern winds, Gandalf knew that his task was near its end. The scroll he had borne from the deeps of Carneathra had been shared among the free peoples, its memory planted like a seed in hidden places, there to grow and strengthen with time. Though the work was quiet and the world at large knew little of it, Gandalf, in his heart of hearts, knew that the greatest deeds are often those unheralded, and that in the end it is the quiet resistance of the faithful that turns the tide of fate. Thus he turned his steps once more toward the white city of Gondor, for he wished to speak again with Elessar and to see with his own eyes how the seeds he had sown were beginning to flower in the new age that dawned. Shadowfoot bore him swiftly across the leagues, and the roads once rutted with war and stained with blood were now alive with travelers and merchants, with the laughter of children and the ringing of hammers rebuilding walls and homes. And as he rode, Gandalf lifted his face to the sky, where the clouds were breaking, and the sun shone pale but strong through the winter haze. And he knew that though darkness might gather again in years to come, it would find Middle-earth not barren, but steadfast, with deep roots hidden beyond its reach, and with hearts still singing the songs of the West. The sun, though pale and struggling, rode higher each day, and the snows began to retreat from the fields and hills. As Gandalf made his way southward through the awakening land, the rivers, once bound in ice, now sang swift and full-throated songs as they hurried to the sea, and the bare branches of the woods showed the first shy blush of green, as though the trees themselves remembered the promise of spring. Yet in Gandalf's heart there was no haste, for he knew that the work which endures is not wrought in the flash of a single moment, but through the slow, patient labor of many hands and many days. And so he traveled at a steady pace, speaking where he found willing ears, sowing remembrance where the soil of memory was rich enough to bear fruit. In time he came once more within sight of Minas Tirith, the White City, rising proud and fair against the slopes of Mount Malouin, her towers catching the morning light like the blades of drawn swords. Smoke rose from 1,000 hearths, and the fields of the Pelennor, though scarred by war, showed green once again, patched with tilled earth where the people had returned to their labors. Gandalf paused upon a low hill and looked long upon the city, and a smile touched his lips, for he saw that the labor of healing had begun in earnest, and that the wounds of battle, though deep, were not beyond mending. He entered the city by the great gates, now fully restored, and he was greeted with joy and reverence, for the memory of his deeds during the siege of Gondor had not faded, and the people honored him as one of their great deliverers. Yet Gandalf made no great show of his coming, but passed quietly through the streets, noting with approval the signs of renewal. The mason's hammer ringing upon fresh-cut stone, the weaver's shuttle flying through bright threads, the laughter of children echoing in alleys once choked with fear. It was here, among these simple labors of peace, that the true strength of Gondor was being reborn, and Gandalf rejoiced to see it. In the high halls of the citadel he was brought before King Elessar, who welcomed him with open arms and brought him swiftly to the court of stone, where the white tree, descendant of Nimloth the Fair, now grew once more in full leaf, its blossoms a vision of the light of the two trees of old beneath its boughs. They spoke long together, and Gandalf recounted the final part of his journey, the passing through Rivendell, the teaching among the rangers, the sowing of memory along the shores of the western sea. Elessar listened intently, his keen gaze never faltering, and when Gandalf at last fell silent, the king rose and laid his hand upon Gandalf's shoulder. "You have done a work beyond the reckoning of this age," he said. "For in a time to come, when kingdoms may again be shaken and towers may again fall, it will not be arms or walls that hold fast against the dark, but the hearts of those who remember the light." And Gandalf, bowing his head, replied, "It is not for me to see that time, my friend, but I have hope, and in hope there is strength, even as in memory there is life." Together they walked the gardens of the citadel, speaking of many things, of the realms that were being restored, of the far countries beyond the sea, where no mortal foot might tread, of the elves who yet lingered, and the fate of the dwarves in their halls of stone. Gandalf counseled the king with wisdom, yet with a lightness of heart, for he saw that rule was strong and just, and that the line of the kings of men had found a new beginning in him. As evening drew near, they stood upon a high balcony overlooking the wide lands westward, and the sun, setting behind the distant mountains, cast the world into a blaze of gold and crimson. Gandalf turned his face to the west and was silent for a long time, and Elessar, standing beside him, did not speak, for he knew that the White Rider's heart was filled with memories of lands beyond the reach of mortal eyes, and of a destiny that none of the children of Middle-earth could wholly share. At length Gandalf spoke, and his voice was soft and filled with a deep and abiding peace. "At work I was sent to do draws to its close," he said, "and soon I shall depart these shores, as all things that are not bound by the circles of this world must in their appointed hour. But I depart with joy, for I have seen with mine own eyes that which I had long hoped for, but scarce dared believe, that the hearts of the free peoples are strong, that their courage endures, and that the memory of the West shall not be forgotten." And Elessar, his voice steady and full of reverence, answered, "You have given us a gift beyond all price, Mithrand. Though you may go where we cannot follow, your work shall endure, and your memory shall not fade from the minds of men." Thus they stood together as the night fell, and the stars kindled one by one in the heavens, ancient and patient as they had been since the world was young. Gandalf lifted his gaze to those eternal lights and felt no sorrow, but only a great and quiet satisfaction. For he knew that the time of the guardianship he had been charged with was fulfilled, and that the trust he had borne from the valor had not been given in vain. The days that followed were filled with quiet counsel and the setting of things in order. Gandalf visited once more the steward's house, where wise men gathered to record the histories of the realm, and there he entrusted a copy of the Oath of the Faithful, that it might be preserved among the chronicles of Gondor for all time. He walked also among the common folk of the city, speaking to them without ceremony, and teaching anew the old songs, now woven with the memory of Carneathra and the Seven Seals, so that even those who might never read the great books would carry the memory in their hearts. At last, when all was prepared, Gandalf made ready to depart from Minas Tirith, his white cloak gleaming in the spring sunlight, and Shadowfoot pawing the ground with eagerness for the road. Many came to bid him farewell, lords and captains, craftsmen and farmers, children bearing garlands of early flowers. Elessar himself stood at the gate with Arwen Undamil by his side, and they bowed low as Gandalf rode forth. Thus the White Rider passed once more beyond the gates of the White City, not in triumph or in sorrow, but in quiet fulfillment, bearing with him the memory of an age now passing into history, and the hope of ages yet to come, and the wind blowing from the west carried with it the faint sound of singing, as if the very stones of Gondor remain. Remembered and rejoiced. The days that followed Gandalf's departure from Minas Tirith passed swiftly, yet they bore with them a sense of quiet inevitability, as though the world itself recognized that an age was drawing to its close. The White Rider traveled slowly through the fair lands of Gondor, passing by the green slopes and silver streams, by orchards blooming in the first strength of spring, and through villages where the people, though they knew not all the reasons for their newfound hope, felt in their hearts a stirring, as of deep waters long silent, beginning once more to flow. In every place he came, Gandalf spoke little, but watched much. And in his seeing he was satisfied, for the memory he had borne so far, the light he had kindled anew, was finding root among the free peoples, and their songs and labors carried the spirit of the faithful without need for heralds or proclamations. Thus he came in time to the southern shores of Gondor, where the land opened out toward the sea, and the wide waters lay glittering under the growing warmth of the sun. The gulls cried overhead, and a salt wind stirred his cloak, and in the breath of the waves and the distant whisper of the tides, Gandalf heard the summons he had long awaited, though he had not spoken of it to any, save perhaps to the deep places of his own heart. For the time had come for him to turn his face westward, not in thought alone, but in body also, and to seek the havens from which those appointed by the Valar might pass beyond the circles of the world. At the havens of Mythland he found Círdan still waiting, though the ancient mariner's eyes looked ever westward, as if already glimpsing shores no mortal could see. Few ships now remained, their tall masts swaying like reeds against the sky, and fewer still were the elves who lingered, for most had sailed already, and the great leaving of the Eldar was all but finished. Yet one ship had been prepared, its sails white as the snows of Mount Mindalawan, and its prow shaped like a swan with wings unfurled, and upon its deck space had been made for Gandalf, should he choose at last to depart. Tírdan greeted him with a smile, both sorrowful and serene, and said, "The time has come, Mithrand. Long have you labored in Middle-earth, and well have you fulfilled the charge laid upon you. Now the straight road lies open, if you will take it." Gandalf stood for a time upon the shore, the wind lifting his white cloak, and the smell of salt filling his senses. He looked back once eastward toward the wide lands he had wandered for so long, the green hills of the Shire, the white towers of Gondor, the wild woods and broken ruins, the swift rivers and the still lakes where the stars gazed down undisturbed. He thought of friends left behind, of laughter shared and sorrow borne, of victories won and losses grieved, and he felt a pang deep and true, for though his spirit yearned for the peace of the West, his love for Middle-earth would not soon be forgotten. Yet he knew also that the season of his work was ended, and that to linger beyond his appointed time would be folly and pride. The age of the Eldar was passing. The age of men had begun. His task given long ago in the high halls of the Valar was complete. The seeds of hope were planted, the memory of the West preserved, and though storms might come again, there would be those who remembered, who endured, and who in their own turn would become the guardians of the light. Thus, with a heart both heavy and glad, Gandalf turned his steps to the ship, and Círdan, following behind, spoke words of blessing in a tongue of the Eldar. Together they boarded, and the sails were loosed to the wind, and the ship moved smoothly out upon the gray waters, leaving behind the shores of Middle-earth. The sea spread wide and endless before them, and the world fell away behind, and a great peace came over Gandalf, as though a long burden had at last been laid down, and he felt the presence of distant shores drawing near, fairer and brighter than memory could hold. The straight road lifted them beyond the bent circles of the world, and the gray rain curtain turned all to silver glass and was rolled back, and he beheld white shores, and beyond them a far green country under a swift sunrise. Thus Gandalf departed Middle-earth, the White Rider, whose coming had been like a flame in the dark, whose counsel had steered kings and common folk alike toward the paths of hope, and whose final gift was a memory stronger than death, a binding of the free peoples to the light of the West. Though his presence was gone from the world of men, the work he had begun would live on in their songs, their labors, and their dreams, a beacon against whatever darkness might yet arise. And so the tale of the Path of the Seven Seals came to its end, not with battle and trumpets, but with the quiet